of course, States. So we've got people from all over the world. We appreciate you joining us this morning. We'll give it a couple more minutes and then we're going to start off with a short video here in a minute. I'll cue it up for Amelia to play that. We'll wait about another minute and we'll get started.
Morning, Dave.
Morning. All the way from Bangkok. How are you?
I'm good. Chamnan sends his regrets. Couldn't get here tonight.
All right.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, how are you?
All good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Oh, yes.
Morning.
Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good.
Morning, Greg. Morning, all.
Morning from right down the road. Morning.
Morning from Brazil.
Morning. How are you?
Just
Terry, how you
fine.
doing?
I'm here in the midst of the virus.
All right. Well, good to see you. Thanks for being here this morning. Just a quick housekeeping items. Question. We'll have, excuse me, we'll have time for question and answers. And I would, if you would put all your questions in the chat to keep it kind of orderly. We're going to try to wrap this up in an hour, and in a minute I'll introduce Ambassador John Cotton Richmond. But we just appreciate you all being here this morning, and how important it is for the membership. You're kind of the boots on the ground, so to speak, for RAGAS, and we just really appreciate your commitment to this issue. And Amelia, if you would start the video, please.
Is that coming through, Dave?
Slavery, this ancient evil by which one human being owns another and uses violence to force them to work. This slavery actually thrives in our world like never before. We are doing away with the idea that human trafficking is something that doesn't happen anymore, or that only happens somewhere else. It is here, and it is now, and it is everyone's responsibility to recognize that. There really are just three things you need to know about modern day slavery. First of all, that it is more vast than ever. Second, that it is just as brutal as ever. But thirdly, it is more stoppable than ever. For the first time in human history, there is a generation alive that could bring an end to slavery as a force in human affairs. In thousands of years, this has never been possible before, but now, on your patch of history, it is possible.
Again, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We're excited to have the opportunity to talk to our membership because you are the key and the backbone to everything that we do. We're just, like I say, we really appreciate what you're doing. And we just for way of information, we're going to have a series of these membership meetings over the next several months, and we're going to have several in January. And each meeting will focus on different topics because, as you know, that Rotary Action Group Against Slavery focuses on all aspects of slavery. Today, one of our key focuses, along with having our keynote speaker, John Cotton Richmond, is on education prevention. So that'll be kind of the focus on this. We're going to try to keep this to about an hour. And I would ask that you utilize the chat for any Q&A. But a lot of people ask, why Rotary Action Group Against Slavery? Why should you join? Why should you engage? And honestly, it's about collective impact for us. Rotary sees amazing clubs doing amazing work on human trafficking and modern slavery around the world, but they look at it as individual projects. We believe this is a movement. As you see, this is our time. This is our moment. As you all know, that Rotary is on the verge of eradicating polio. We believe the issue of human rights should be one of the next areas of focus. And so when they see us working collectively as one people, one unit within Rotary, they're more likely to really engage in that effort to make it one of our next areas of focus. The other thing I'll mention is, our current president, Chiar, and our next president, Jennifer Jones, one of their focuses is on empowering girls. And that's exactly what we do every day. Everything we do with our action group and with this issue is empowering girls and women to do better. We work with survivors. We work with all different aspects of slavery to help empower those girls. And part of what the program today is about education prevention so that we can prevent this from ever happening. And we believe that the youth are the ones that are going to solve this problem. We can plant the seed, but they're the ones that are going to do it. And that's why over the last couple of years, we've really put a focus on the education prevention, because they're the next generation of leaders that are going to solve this problem. Just real quick, our mission is Rotary Action Group Against Slavery is committed to connect, empower, and equip Rotarians to engage in their community to eradicate all forms of modern slavery, human trafficking, locally and around the world. And again, like I said, we believe in the collective impact, and we believe membership is the key to what we're doing. And we encourage you to get your friends, to get Rotarians, but also non-Rotarians to join. And I'll just mention one thing too. We did and John was part of this as well. We did a summit last January. We had over 500 participants in the summit, and we actually had, it was a 7-hour webinar. We had no less than 200 people the entire 7 hours, which was pretty amazing. But from that, we had over about 35% of those attending the webinar were non-Rotarians. And so we also believe this is a membership tool for Rotary. We've started, I believe, 4 now cause-based clubs that deal with human trafficking. So this is an issue Rotarians care about. And we, as an action group, have just launched a new website, and we want to make it a resource center for you all. We want to be there to support you in this endeavor, and anything we can do to help and support and encourage, we want to do that. And we truly believe in the model of collaboration, and that's what we try to do. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce a really good friend, John Cotton Richmond. He's a former ambassador to the Trafficking in Persons Office at the State Department. and currently is with Benton's, works on there, is a partner with Benton's law firm, the largest in the world, federal regulatory and compliance practice. And he's been a leader in this field for many, many years. He started the human trafficking, or co-founder of the Human Trafficking Institute, which dealt with law enforcement around the world. He was also a former U.S. attorney. He's been involved in this issue for many, many years. He's won several awards, including Shared Hopes Award, Pathfinder Award for the amazing work that he's done on human trafficking. And getting to know him all these years, he has so many connections. He's actually helped us on several things that we've worked on. But one example about the power of Rotary.
Thank you very.
If you would mute that for me, thank you. Recently, we had a situation come up, and just talking about the power of Rotary. Cynthia, who's on the call, is our coordinator, received a WhatsApp message from somebody she knew from Argentina, who had received a message from a mom in Mexico that their daughter had been trafficked for 2 months and didn't know what to do, been trying to get somebody to help. And so reached out to John, reached out to A21 in Mexico, and within 24 hours, that girl was rescued. And Cynthia sent me a picture of the mom hugging the girl, first time she'd seen her. So the 17-year-old girl was rescued because of the power of Rotary. And that's what we do. That's only the tip of the iceberg. And one other really good example I'll just mention before I turn it over to John is that Rotary is international, but we're very community based. And that's what I love about it. We're in 200 countries, 34,000 clubs. And so when we tell Rotarians that don't know a lot about this issue, look at what you can do in your sphere of influence in your community. And one example I'll give you of that is as an owner of the McDonald's franchise in South Georgia, that I met with their club, and they ended up starting a human trafficking committee. And he decided to print the Polaris hotline, which is a North American hotline for trafficking victims. He decided to print their number on their paper tray liners in a restaurant. Well, they rescued 5 girls because of that. And so he did what he could do in his sphere of influence. And I think we do it collectively. The impact Rotary can have is enormous. And so I just really, again, thank you for your commitment. And I encourage you to visit our website. And if you're not a member, most on the call are, but if you know others that want to join, we want to show that collective impact to Rotary International. But again, John, I appreciate your friendship and your lifelong service to this issue. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say, and thanks for everything you do for this cause. I think you're muted, John. Sorry. There you go.
Thanks, Dave. I'm grateful to get to join you all today for this meeting. And I'm impressed by the global reach of Rotary as it's exhibited by the people who are on this call right now. And so for those of you who are up really early in the morning, good morning. For those of you who stayed up late at night, good evening. As Dave said, my name is John Richmond. I have been working on this issue of freedom, this idea about how traffickers exploit others in commerce. I've been doing this for most of my career. I originally started with International Justice Mission. It was fun to see that video and hear Gary Haugen's voice. When IJM was very young and small, I got the opportunity to go to India and live there for a little over 3 years and start IJM's slavery work in India. And my family and I just were deeply impacted by that experience. My son, our second child, was born in India. And so we love that community, we love that nation, and I miss it a great deal. And after that, you know, as Dave said, I worked as a federal prosecutor. I've worked on the policy side with the United Nations, and most recently on the foreign policy aspects of this, as we got to lead U.S. foreign policy on trafficking in persons around the world. And so I'm grateful. One of the things that's unique about the issue of trafficking is that it occupies some rare political real estate in Washington, D.C. This is a bipartisan issue. This is an issue that has champions on both sides of the aisle. all the trafficking ambassadors, we're actually friends with each other. We grew up together in the space. We know each other. We stay in touch. I'm looking forward to being with Ambassador Dabaka in a few weeks in Africa. I talked to Ambassador Coppage and Ambassador Lagan a great deal. So I just encourage you that as you're engaging people on this issue in any country in the world, I think you're going to find that you can bring people together around the issue of trafficking that may disagree about lots of other policy issues, that may disagree with each other about political philosophies or worldviews. But on this we have agreement. And I want to come back to that idea at the end of my remarks before we start Q&A. First, let me share why I think Rotary is special. Not only do you have an international reach, but you can do some things that governments can't do. You are not limited by terms of appointment. You're not limited by jurisdictions and borders and areas of responsibility. You can actually move fairly fluidly around the world. And you can have a longer term plan than the average political appointee that's going to serve for 2.3 years and move on. You can be thinking about long-term change. And I think that long-term perspective is critical because short-term thinking is a toxic fruit of bureaucracy. It is always thinking in the short term and not in the long term. And Rotary can add something special to that conversation. You can also work with identifying victims, as Dave just shared about that case from Argentina and Mexico, which sounds amazing. But you can also support local NGOs, whether it be a residential shelter or a drop-in center in your community. You know about all these different groups and can help actually refer victims from one to another. For instance, you may have a very high structured shelter, the way it's developed and organized in one city, and that may be the wrong fit for a victim. Perhaps a victim needs something a bit different, a lower barrier shelter. And you can help connect them moving from one city to another, or vice versa. Someone might be in a low barrier shelter that needs a high structured shelter, or maybe someone needs a shelter that can also take dependent children, which are rare, quite frankly. And so you can help organizations network and be a referral source from one area to another. Again, because you have this global network. I'm also impressed by Rotary's longevity. You guys have been interested in this space for a long time. I've seen a lot of groups come and go. I've seen a lot of well-intentioned people motivated with passion that's not sustainable exit the field. Longevity matters, staying involved over the long term, this long obedience in the same direction. I think you guys are great examples of that. So what I'd like to do today is focus on 3 ideas and then come back to this idea that we talked about before about this unique time in history. So the first idea I'd like to talk about is the prosecution problem. So the prosecution problem comes up in a number of ways. Sometimes we talk about this idea that we'll never prosecute our way out of this problem. We'll never arrest our way out of trafficking. True statements. But there are also straw man arguments, right? We're also never going to shelter our way out. We're never going to educate our way out. We need all of these things. We were gifted in 2000 the 3P paradigm: prosecution, protection, and prevention. And we need all 3 of these P's. We need all 3 portions of this. There are 3 legs of a stool, if you will. We've heard a lot of folks talk about like moving away from or diminishing the P of prosecution, trying to suggest that we've overinvested in the criminal justice approach and we really need to shift to a public health approach. And I'd love to give you some ideas around that idea right now. One is that I don't think it's borne out by the facts. The idea that we've overinvested in a criminal justice approach would suggest that we're doing really well and we're seeing lots of prosecutions. The reality is globally, governments have reported a 48% decrease in prosecutions of traffickers since 2015. And that's not just a number that's inflated because of slow government responses due to COVID. It was trending down the whole time. So since 2015, we've dropped 48% in global prosecutions. That could lead someone to believe that we're catching them all. The problem's going away. We have less trafficking, therefore less prosecutions. But during that same period of time, we've seen a 40% increase in the number of victims governments have reported that they've identified. So we have rising victim identification and decreasing perpetrator accountability. This is a risk-reward calculus for these economically motivated traffickers. There's incredibly high reward in the form of illicit profits, and there's virtually no risk of getting caught. I talked to a trafficker just a few weeks ago in San Diego, and he was telling me that when he was trafficking people, he never even worried about getting caught. He knew it probably would never happen. And for him, it never did. Statistically, you're more likely to get struck by lightning than prosecuted for human trafficking. That is stunning. Traffickers are operating with impunity. And I think one of the advocacy tools that Rotary could take up is supporting local law enforcement in your communities, encouraging traffickers to be held accountable. We've got a number of countries, I think there's 14 countries that gave suspended sentences to over 50% of the human traffickers that country convicted. That's stunning. A trafficker that's been arrested, tried with due process, convicted under the laws of the nation, and then walks out the front door of the courthouse in front of the victims with no punishment. The message that that sends to victims about their value is massive. It says that you don't matter. You can get more time for stealing someone's cow or wrecking their car than you could for selling their bodies. And way too many victims don't get to make the most basic decisions about their lives, when they wake up, where they work, or who touches their bodies. So I think we need to do better. We need to do better about trafficker accountability. Obviously, we don't want to overemphasize the criminal justice approach, but we don't want to delete it. We don't want to diminish it. And I think we need to do better at it. But there's a flip side to the prosecution problem. And that is that far too often, while we're not prosecuting traffickers, we are prosecuting their victims. I am more worried than ever that you're more likely to get arrested and go to jail as a human trafficking victim than you are as a trafficker. Through the United States, in other countries in the world, again and again, traffickers are compelling victims to engage in illegal conduct and then using that forced criminality as a tool of coercion, but also as a threat of incarceration. We need to make sure that if a victim is compelled to do something unlawfully while they're being trafficked, that they're not held responsible for that. Indeed, they were coerced. They were operating under duress. They lacked the intent to commit the crime because of the coercion overcoming their ability to make choices. We need to make good on our promise of non-prosecution of victims. And so I think that when we think about prosecution, we have a twofold problem. One side of that coin is that we're not prosecuting traffickers. The other side of that coin is that we are prosecuting victims. This needs to be reversed. And it's going to take a lot of advocacy. It's going to take getting to know the local district attorneys and having candid conversations with them, calling them and asking them questions about this. What are their policies? How are they reviewing charges? And not just charges around prostitution and solicitation, but around identity theft and larceny and other crimes that victims might be forced to commit. So that's one big idea in the trafficking space right now. Another is a burden shifting that's happening. And I think this one may be less well known because it's happening in real time. I kid you not, it is changing by the week right now in terms of the legal landscape. We are seeing governments shifting the burden from themselves to businesses to deal with human rights abuses, including trafficking. The EU Parliament in March passed a resolution to say that they want a forced labor due diligence law. That is a mandatory human rights due diligence law that will shift us out of a disclosure framework into a diligence framework. Let me explain what I mean by that. The California Transparency Act of 2010 and the UK and Australia Modern Slavery Acts require companies to disclose what, if anything, they're doing about forced labor in their supply chains. The laws don't actually require the companies to do anything affirmatively. They just have to tell the public what they're doing. So theoretically, they can say we're doing nothing. And that's not what companies say. Companies say that they have policies and they're looking into it and they're trying to do the best they can. But this new framework coming out of the EU shifts that. It says not only do you have to disclose, we're going to create a mandate that you have to map your supply chains, and we're going to hold you responsible for the human rights violations of your suppliers, of your vendors. Think about that for a moment. Think about all the procurement that goes on within a company, even within Rotary, where Rotary buys its stacks of paper or its brochures. Are there human rights violations in that printer, in that supplier? What if Rotary doesn't know? Under the EU law, it wouldn't matter if Rotary knew. Rotary would be held responsible. It would be assumed that it had to verify that there were no human rights abuses in the supply chain. So this law is right now with the EU Commission. EU Commission will put together a piece of legislation, send it back to the Parliament to vote. But meanwhile, while all this is occurring, Germany in June went ahead and passed a mandatory human rights due diligence law that is set to take effect in 13 months. It'll take effect January 1, 2023, and apply to any company doing business in Germany that has more than 3,000 employees. Now that coverage mandate is going to drop in 2024 to 1,000 employees, and I think it's going to drop even further after that. This is already law. It just hasn't come into effect yet. And it says that companies are responsible for the human rights violations of their suppliers. Now, there were a few negotiations in the Bundestag at the very end. They limit it to one level deep in the supply chain. So it's not your supplier's supplier, just your direct vendors. But that's likely to change over time too. And so I think we have a new issue to deal with, which is how can companies get ready? How can businesses be thinking about dealing with these new laws, these new regulations that are coming into place? The risk is shifting, and it's causing the issue to move from corporate responsibility offices to general counsel offices. This is moving from corporate philanthropy to corporate compliance. And I think we need to figure out how we're going to deal with that. And Rotary, with its reach, can help both influence how this law is developing, but also influence businesses whom I think don't want forced labor in their supply chain. And there could be a positive aspect of this where we can push down through procurement lanes improvements in the rights of workers all over the world. So there can be good that comes from this, but it is a big shift, a tectonic shift, if you will. And I think that over the next 5 or 6 years, we're going to see a lot of discussion about corporate responsibility and corporate accountability. So we talked about the prosecution problem, the burden shifting to corporate accountability. I'd also like to mention trends around prevention education. And I know that this is something that Rotary cares a great deal about, something I care a great deal about. You know, the idea that we could prevent the crime from occurring so no one has to suffer is ideal. And a lot of our discussions around prevention education have focused on awareness raising and have focused on vulnerability reduction. So we talk about awareness raising, we're talking about making people aware of the crime and how it looks. All forms, forced labor and sex trafficking, adults and minors, foreign nationals, as well as US citizens or citizens of your country. We think about letting people know what's going on. And we normally do it through narrative. We do it through story. And often the stories are only about one form or one expression of trafficking. In the United States, it frequently takes the form of pimp-directed sex trafficking, which is common, but there's lots of other trafficking expressions. And so as you're thinking about prevention education, one thing I think is important is to think about all forms of trafficking. We want to raise awareness, not just about one type of trafficking, but raise awareness about all the different expressions. The other thing I think we need to think about is we don't just want to make people afraid. We don't want to tell kids in schools, even if we're using age-appropriate language, that there are all these bad guys out there looking to capture them, looking to harm them. I mean, we want them to understand that traffickers exist, but we also want to empower them to know that they have the ability to stop traffickers and to help their friends. They can help identify things. But what if we went beyond just that? What if we called kids that we're talking to around prevention education to be engaged? What if we called them to become great accountants? Like really study, become an amazing forensic accountant and help us track down the money. What if we encourage them to become excellent coders to help us find the live streaming videos of online sex trafficking, which has exploded during COVID? People aren't just, it's not file sharing, it's not peer-to-peer anymore. Now it is live streaming of child sexual abuse material. It's hard to find. We need more coders. We need people with real expertise. What if we encouraged young people to become FBI agents? and prosecutors and trauma-informed counselors. Part of our prevention education could actually be a call to excellence, a call to be engaged in the issue, not to be powerless to deal with traffickers, but to be empowered to actually be a part of the change. This could include educating people about what commercial sex acts actually are. That is, what is the life of someone who is engaged in that business? What is the demand side of the equation look like? Like, could we encourage folks not to purchase commercial sex? Most companies now are moving towards a policy of their employees not being allowed to purchase commercial sex, even if they're traveling in a country where purchasing commercial sex is legal. I remember quite clearly the day when I was sitting at the Department of Justice as a federal prosecutor, and I got an email from the Office of Personnel Management, along with every other federal employee, telling us we now have a policy that we're not allowed to purchase commercial sex when we're traveling using US government money. Well, of course we couldn't do that. But every policy has a story, and this story involved a group of Secret Service agents down in South America that generated the need for a policy. Perhaps Rotary could have such a policy. Perhaps we could encourage kids in prevention education not to purchase commercial sex, because if you purchase enough commercial sex, you will ultimately be purchasing sex from someone who's been coerced. You will become that individual's worst nightmare on that day. And so I think prevention education can go well beyond what we think about. Prevention education could also include thinking about what we buy. What's in the supply chain of our favorite products? What is the cost of fast fashion? What is the cost of that cheap t-shirt? It's hard to know. What if consumers began to demand from companies that they are looking into their supply chains and not wanting to purchase products made with forced labor? You know, we're in a debate right now. And one thing that I'll highlight for you is when our good priorities are in conflict. And right now they are. We've got a priority to deal with climate, big goals around renewable energies. We've got silica, almost all of which comes out of Xinjiang, China. It's necessary for the creation and the building of solar panels. America right now wants to buy lots of solar panels. To buy all those solar panels, we need to get the silica from Xinjiang. But Xinjiang's engaged in a genocide. And I don't use that word lightly. Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Blinken both agreed it's a genocide. I'm not sure those guys could agree that grass is green, but they agree on this, right? This is where continuity comes together. And it's not just a genocide, it's involving religious discrimination, lack of religious freedom, forced sterilization of Uyghurs, and forced labor. And so what do we do when our desire to go green requires us to go green on the backs of exploited workers? There must be a third way. There must be a way for us to create solar panels without enriching the trafficker, that is the government of China that is trafficking its citizens, would reap the profits from our purchasing power to buy the solar panels made with forced labor. These are tough issues because we have dueling priorities, noble priorities. We want to advance human rights and we want to have more renewable energy. We got to think about how this works. The same with batteries. Think of every lithium ion battery, the ones in your phones, the ones in the device that you're using right now to be on this call, require cobalt. Almost all the world's cobalt comes from the eastern portion of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Almost all that cobalt is tainted with forced labor, and really horrific forced labor, in many cases, forced child labor. And the government of the DRC is unable to secure that portion of the country. I was just in Kinshasa just before the pandemic and got to see firsthand what this looks like. You know, there's the Global Battery Alliance and other groups that are trying to reduce this, trying to come up with other ways. But we have to deal with the fact that the products that we're purchasing every day, whether it be electronics, solar panels, chocolate bars, they are tainted with forced labor. And we as consumers, part of prevention education could include how can we advocate through the power of our own commerce to push for freedom around the world. I think people would pay a few dollars more for a bag of candy for Halloween if they knew that it came with without kids in the Ivory Coast being forced to work. You know, I think the marginal increase in the cost of a battery that wasn't mined with forced labor could be borne by the world. I think people might pay an extra $1 for their T-shirt to know that it wasn't sewn together by forced workers in Bangladesh. If we're going to care about the globe, if we're going to care about freedom, it has to be freedom for everyone. Because the whole premise here is that everyone has inherent value. Everyone has human dignity, that our rights do not come from government, they precede government. These rights are inalienable, and we need to protect them. And this is what cuts across all divisions, right? Everyone has inherent value, regardless of where they grew up, what they look like, what their race is, what their educational level is, or their ability to produce or to contribute to society. Everyone has value. Let me come back to the video you saw in the beginning. I didn't realize that Dave was going to play that, but it's so good to hear international justice missions work. But what Gary Haugen was arguing in that video is that this patch of history, as he said, this patch of history that we occupy, that we can actually do something, that we have a power that has never been on earth before. We have the power to actually end institutional systemic slavery. I agree with him. I think he's right. It's not Pollyanna thinking. It's not uber optimism that just wants to separate people from their wallets and their dollars to raise money for good causes. It's actually doable. So let me make an argument from history about the doability of stopping slavery. For 4,000 years of recorded human history, we have had some form of human trafficking on every inhabited continent. It has looked different in different places. We've called it by different names: peonage, involuntary servitude, debt bondage, bonded labor, chattel slavery. But it's existed everywhere. The Aztecs and the Incas, the Greeks and the Romans, India and China, Hebrews, everyone has talked about slavery until about 220 years ago. And to be clear, it was democratically approved. It's in our Constitution in 3 places. It was religiously endorsed, and it was culturally accepted. And then 220 years ago, we began to see one by one, countries begin to wake up and say that slavery should be abolished. Wilberforce and his friends in Clapham gathered together and spent the better part of his career finding out only 36 hours before his death that Parliament finally ended the slave trade in 1807. Of course, it took them until 1833 to emancipate the slaves. It took us until 1865 to have formal emancipation. But think about this. If you get those timelines of history from middle school, your middle school social studies class, you plot out all the different things. 4,000 years of recorded history, there's slavery. And then in the last 220 years, every single country in the world has come together to pass a law to say that slavery is wrong. That's stunning and rapid historic change. In 2014, at the Vatican, leaders of all the major world religions gathered together to say that their sacred texts should never again be used to support the institution of slavery or human trafficking. This is big change. And now the question is, now that we have these laws, now that we have these protections on parchment, how do we get them to the people they're intended to protect? I think the challenge for our generation is, how do we create delivery systems of justice, delivery systems of social services to make these promises of freedom true for all the 24.9 million people that are suffering? And that is work worth doing. That is why I am excited to get up every day and be engaged in this work. It's why I'm excited that Rotary has been consistently interested in this topic and in caring about this. It's why I think Gary Haugen is right. We can make a difference. There is something special about this season. And I love his phrase, our patch of history. We get to tend it. And we'll get, hopefully, our descendants will look back on it and think that we did a good job with our responsibility in this season. So I'm happy to stop there, Dave, and toss it to questions and answers, or you all can just move on with your meeting, whatever you need to do. But thank you.
No, great job. Thanks so much. And just looking at some of the chat, you struck a nerve about getting Rotary engaged on the supply chain side of it and writing policy. We're actually in conversations. Matt Friedman is also on the call this morning as well, or for him this evening. And he's working with us on the supply chain side too. And I'd love for you to participate with us on that moving forward. And just a couple quick examples before I get to one of the questions. When the End Modern Slavery Act was before Congress a few years ago with Senator Bob Corker, we ended up being on the steering committee with Senator Corker, and we're able to get Rotarians from both sides of the aisle. 13 different senators co-sponsored that legislation. And the comment was made to me was that a lot of times the same 10 NGOs would go to the meetings or the hearings, but then also when Rotarians and business leaders in their community go to these hearings and voice their concern about passing such legislation. So advocacy is an area that Rotary can take on a huge, and again, we're all supply chain, we're all purchasers, we're all buyers. And so the more we can do with that can really impact the issue. One of the questions is what kind of work, and I've done a lot of work with Walmart on this issue, but what kind of work are we doing with Amazon, Walmart, Target, some of those companies to address the issue? I know there's one example that you may be able to cite with Walmart partnering with IGM in the I believe the Philippines to work on the fishing industry.
Yeah, Walmart certainly has invested some money with the International Justice Mission on fishing, and fishing is a great example of an area of concern. You know, the conditions on these fishing boats, particularly in Asia, are dire. People are out sometimes for 2 years, maybe 3 years at a time. They don't get to dock, they don't get off the boat. They are literally trapped, and the conditions under which they fish are pretty arduous. And we just don't know that as consumers. Like when you go to buy, a bag of frozen tilapia at Costco, you have no idea who the people were who caught that fish. And I think it's really hard. You know, I think that Amazon and Walmart, these big companies are paying attention to the issue. They're paying attention a lot more now that Europe is making moves towards the diligence framework. But there's a lot more that needs to be done. This is not something that you just fiddle with around the edges. It needs to become a priority. And I think that's what we're seeing right now as the conversations are moving into the C-suite and not just in corporate social responsibility. There's a lot that can happen. But there's also an opportunity for small and medium-sized suppliers all over the world. If they could get their supply chain in order and they could be transparent about it, that could become a differentiator as they're trying to become the supplier for the big company. Part of the sales pitch is like, buy your parts from us because our supply chain is clean. We have all the protocols in place to make sure that human rights abuses are not happening within our supply chain. Therefore, it makes business sense for you to select us as your supplier. So I think there are opportunities both on the large multinational companies, but also in those smaller companies that want to sell to them to get engaged.
Yeah, and I think you kind of somewhat answered Matt Friedman's question about that. And instead of the name and shame, promote the positive work that companies are doing to engage in this issue.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously we want transparency. If someone's messed up, we want to be honest about it. But I don't think that shame, manipulation, and guilt are effective motivators. We don't practice that in our family, at least. We want to focus on calling folks to who they're becoming. And that includes companies. How do we call companies to who they're becoming? If we need to hold them accountable to things they've done in the past, we will. But naming and shaming, I don't think it certainly shouldn't be our primary strategy.
That's right. And I would love for you and Matt and a few others, we've got some others on our team to get together to figure out what policies Rotary can put in place. We can go to Rotary National and say, hey, you need this policy in place. The other thing, as you probably know, we do Rotary National conventions all over the world every year. And so we've been in conversations about creating a policy that when we go to a country, what are their practices as it relates to slavery? Should we go to that country because of that? And so if we as an action group can implement some policies that Rotary International adopts, I think it could be a huge win-win for everybody.
I totally agree with that, Dave. One place to look is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. I think that was the first multilateral organization to enter into a procurement policy that it wasn't going to purchase anything that was made with forced labor, where they're trying to push down through their procurement. The US government's done the same thing, by the way. At least on paper, we have now made a commitment under the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR, that we're not going to purchase things made with forced labor. The hard part's implementation, though, right? How does a procurement officer figure it out? Like, how does someone who's actually deciding where you're going to buy the vehicles or where you're going to buy the paper, how do they know what they're buying is not made with forced labor?
Great. Thank you. The other question I had, and you touched on it during your talk, but as you may or may not know, Rotary's new area of focus, a seventh area of focus, is the environment. So we, as an action group, are trying to create some, I guess, information to them so that when they focus on the environment, they make sure that they're also looking at the slave labor down the supply chain as well. And just, I would love to continue that conversation with you and Matt and others to see how we can engage in Rotary, make sure not engage in supply chain slavery.
Tremendous. I'd love to be a part of that.
Sounds great. Let's see if there's any other questions here. Let me look real quick. I think just a lot.
Dave?
Yeah.
On transparency, I mean, John has covered so much of the issues of modern slavery, but to me, one of the big disadvantages of the California, UK, and Australia transparency and supply chain clauses is the absence of public authorities from the legislation. They are the bodies that get involved with the largest amount of contracts. And I wondered, John, particularly with your knowledge of what's happening in California, the very first supply chain clause, whether there was any indication that public bodies would be dragged into the legislation so that they can be restricted, they could be forced to inform how they are treating the supply chains.
It's a great question. Yeah, so the California law is limited to manufacturers and retailers. That's it. That was a real step forward in the UK Modern Slavery Act, is that the UK Modern Slavery Act applied to any businesses. And then it's now expanded to where even every UK government agency provides a modern slavery statement. Same with Australia. And Australia and the UK have both created now modern slavery statement registries, where all the modern slavery statements are posted and can be compared to one another. There are no such comparable instruments out of the California law, or certainly no federal law in the United States that is similar. And so what we've seen is a complaint over the last 11 years that the California Act was toothless, in a sense, that it has a requirement, but it doesn't actually have an enforcement mechanism. It's a fair complaint, a fair criticism. We're seeing that change now with Germany's law. Germany's law actually gives authority to a federal agency to go out and investigate companies to make sure that they are mapping their supply chain and determining if their vendors have human rights or environmental abuses. So that authority, that mechanism of enforcement and accountability is coming with the diligence model in Europe.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for being with us, John. We appreciate you spending the most of the hour with us, and thanks for your work. It's amazing and encouraging to hear there is hope. Like Gary said, there is hope in solving this, and you're a big part of that. And we want to partner with you and create policies and work together to make this happen. So I really appreciate your time today. I know you're a busy man and going to be jumping off here, but we really appreciate you and the work you're doing.
Sounds good. It was great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me, and please stay in touch.
All right, great. Take care. All right, super. That was an amazing presentation. And now we're going to switch topics just slightly. We have Amelia Stanfield, who is a coordinator for us in the Virginia area, but she's also leading the charge on the education prevention. We call it the CAPE plan, which she'll explain more about, but we've been talking about education prevention for several years, and she kind of headed the steering committee, which she'll introduce the steering committee when she speaks, but has really done a great job of putting together policy, putting together, helping put together a toolkit with our team. And we want to be a resource for other Rotary clubs and districts. On our websites, we'll have a toolkit around education prevention, but also other areas of trafficking. And appreciate your work on this, Amelia, and she will explain a little bit more about the CAPE program that RAGAS is implementing.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate it. Nothing like having a ambassador be your warm-up act. I mean, no pressure, right? But I'm so thankful what he shared, because this ties directly in with it, with where RAGAS is going, and the opportunity for you as Rotarians, either you individually, you as your club, or you as your district, to really jump in and really make a difference. And we're going to give you some of those tools and show you where to find those tools today. And there's an opportunity to be able to do a proposal and do a project in your local area as well. So join me as we talk about the Rotary Action Group Against Slavery, our CAPE plan, which stands for Community Awareness and Prevention Education. And as I keep saying over and over until I'm blue in the face, not every superhero has a mask, but most have a cape. And we encourage you to have one as well. So we started off our CAPE committee last spring. I want to introduce you to those. There's some of them are on the call today, several are. I was the facilitator of it, but Dave McCleary, Ashley Bryant, who's a Rotarian, she's a coordinator in California. She also represents her day job, which is with Three Strands Global Foundation, which is an anti-trafficking education prevention education organization. So been a great partner through this process. Bob Deering, who's another RAGAS coordinator in California, past district governor, Kazette Bagari, who's a RAGAS board member, a district liaison, also in California. George Belatistas, who's a RAGAS vice chair. He's in District 6000 and he's the coordinator in Iowa. Malcolm Baird, RAGAS board member and a director in Australia. And then Valerie Ellery, couldn't leave her out. She's amazing, and she's not a Rotarian yet, but someone in Florida needs to snag her because she's awesome. And she is with A21, which is an amazing international organization as well, working on anti-trafficking. So we had a heck of a group to be able to work on this. Part of what we did is we came up with a new RAGAS mission statement. Ties directly in with what John just got done talking about, that our action group is committed to connecting, empowering, and equipping Rotarians to engage their local communities to eradicate all forms of human trafficking locally and around the globe. So really that four piece of it is connecting, engaging, equipping, and empowering, and how important each of those are in the fight. We broke down into stakeholders. We looked at who are our main stakeholders in the community awareness and prevention education piece of it, because that's all we were focused in here. There's other groups that are working on other parts of the anti-trafficking pieces, but we were focused specifically on community awareness and prevention education. So we said, first and foremost, obviously the individual Rotary members like you and me, those clubs, those districts around the world, the RAGAS members, the ambassadors and the coordinators, the general public, obviously out there, our schools, universities, and educators, our local governments and elected officials, parents, students, including primary, secondary, and university students, and those non-governmental organizations, NGOs, including curriculum providers. We looked at those guys and we ranked them, I say, in the ability to pay or invest. It's really where, doesn't mean that they're more or less important, that's more or less who would be able to help fund some of these projects and where to look to be able to make them happen. We broke down into looking at each of those stakeholder groups and said, what are some of their what are some of their problems and solutions? And we looked at activities to support them. The biggest thing that we saw for most individual Rotary members and the clubs and districts is they don't even know what human trafficking, modern day slavery is. What is it, or that it takes place in their own community, and they don't understand. So how do you even get them motivated? So some of that is providing awareness materials and getting the word out to folks like you who already have a little bit of a spark and a passion, and being able to help flame or fan that fire to be able to get it out there. So we're also going to be writing articles and blogs for the Rotary magazines, having booths at House of Friendship opportunities for your districts and zones and the Rotary International conventions. putting together a speakers bureau with the RAGAS and ambassadors and coordinators to help speak or to be able to help coordinate speakers. Each of these things, we also said, okay, so now I've got the desire, I know about it, I got the desire, now what? It's a little daunting, I'll tell you, because I started a project here in Warrenton, Virginia. We're a little tiny, we had 70,000 people in our whole county, little tiny community, but we knew we needed to do something. It's daunting to create a new project from scratch without support. So the beauty of this is that we've put together and are in the process of still building a CAPE campaign toolbox to be able to help you implement a community awareness or prevention education program in your own community, being able to have, to be able to help you raise awareness. And once that awareness is there and the demand is there in the schools or in the community, to be able to take into the schools education to be able to help promote anti-trafficking locally. We also said, okay, so yeah, the demand is there to have an education program. But then what? Like, there's so many organizations out there that provide education programs. How do I pick one? And we don't want you to have to go out and create one. Like, that just seems like a waste of time and energy when you're not necessarily, you maybe, but most Rotarians are not necessarily experts in creating curriculum, especially curriculum around anti-trafficking. So we wanted to be able to provide a recommended criteria in which to be able to take those outside opportunities from education partners and say, okay, this is the criteria that we recommend based on best practices. Does it check off each of those opportunities? Does it make sense? And at the end, then you'd help you narrow that down. We have vetted some in various languages. Those will be in the toolbox. So you can go in and say, okay, I don't want to go through and figure all this out on my own. I don't want to work with necessarily someone who's in my backyard that is somebody local necessarily. It's all up to you. But we'll have some of those to be able to say, okay, here's the ones that we know that have been vetted, that we've partnered with in the past, that will be able to provide that education, which is, to me, wonderful, because I didn't have that as I started out in this process. So creating a new project is overwhelming. So we're also going to have a showcase, and we're going to be looking to each of you. I saw in the chat tons of great projects that are going on. We're going to be looking to you to be able to give us a quick update or write-up on your project so that we can put those with your contact information behind password protection, so it isn't out for the world, but for the other RAGAS members to be able to access, to go, okay, get inspiration instead of always creating a new wheel. I'm a big fan of rip off and duplicate, R&D, and that would be just put shiny spinners on somebody else's wheel and be able to implement it better in your own community and more customized to your community. So we're going to give you some of those tools just to make it easy, so you don't have to start over from scratch every single time. We're also going to be able to provide some materials for you so that when you want to have a House of Friendship booth at your local district or at your zone, or if you want to participate in the RI convention with us, or if you want to be part of the Speakers Bureau, we'll give you the tools to be able to do that so that you don't have to figure it out all on your own. So we want to make it as easy and simple for you to be able to help share that word as a RAGAS member or as a Rotarian to be able to get it out there. So with that, we're doing some fun stuff. We have, we said, okay, we put all this together. We need to test it. So what we're putting out today and sharing with you today is our CAPE pilot request for proposals. We want to test that toolbox and that playbook in the Rotary year 2022 and 23 by creating and distributing it, the brief RFP that you'll see here in a minute, to be able to have human trafficking, modern slavery, prevention, education projects, and community, should also say community awareness projects. It's both community awareness and prevention education projects to all Rotary district governors. We would like to have at least 10 districts from around the globe. So we don't want them all to be in America or all to be in Africa. We want them to be well distributed from both big clubs and small clubs, big districts, small districts, remote versus urban. We want a good sampling of at least 10 from around the globe who are going to commit to beta testing this with us, to be able to go through and work that toolbox, work that playbook that we're putting together over 6 months to a year. The top 10 scoring districts, we're going to be able to match up to $1,000 of funding to be able to assist in their prevention, education, community awareness projects. And even if you're not in the 10 that are selected for funding, we are still going to look at other projects, and maybe we'll get 100 projects. That'd be so cool. But that might be optimistic for me. Even if you're not in a funded project, you'll be able to still participate and you'll still get benefits. So you just won't have the $1,000 of funding. But let's talk about what those districts will receive. So whether or not you're in a funded project, everybody in your district will receive a 1-year trial membership to Ragus. That way, everyone, whether they're in the actual working on the actual project that the district or the specific club has put together, or they happen to hear about it because somebody did a program at their club and they said, well, we want to be able to do a community awareness prevention education project in my club or in my community. How do we do that? Well, we want them to have access to that toolbox. And again, because it will be behind lock and key, if you will, with password protection, we want everyone in that district to be able to get in there, dig around, have access to it for 1 year, so that if they say, I want to do something as well, they're not left out of it. So everybody in that district will get it. We're going to assign mentors with either a Ragus coordinator or ambassador to be able to help consult on their projects, to be able to help them with figuring out, okay, how do you collaborate with those partner stakeholders, maybe help connect them, things like that, just to be able to give you support. Because sometimes when you're creating these projects, you can feel a little lonely and out on an island, and we want to be able to provide that support to the level of which that club or that district needs. We're also going to ask all of the participating districts and clubs, quite frankly, to adopt a provided draft resolution at the district level. So as we talked about earlier with John Richmond about the idea of really encouraging locally our clubs and our individual Rotarians in our districts to make a difference and take a stand against human trafficking and modern slavery. We're going to have that locally, as well as a resolution to be able to sign, to be able to send to Rotary International, and to be able to push them to ratify what's already there that we saw earlier in the chat that's already been ahead of them for the council legislation. Lastly, we'll also be committing, we're going to ask each district to commit to appointing a human trafficking liaison at the club, at the district, and frankly, be great at the club level, to be able to help coordinate efforts throughout the grant period, and ideally, obviously beyond, because this is not something that just ends. You don't just finish and go, wrapped it up and you're finished. It has a life. So having someone that we can have contact with, that we make sure information gets to regularly. And that might be you, obviously, but we want to make sure that there's someone specifically assigned so we can get information out and they can help disperse it, because obviously Rotary International doesn't want us sending stuff to 1.4 million Rotarians. Apparently that's considered spam, but we look to you to be able to do that. So the grant application is super simple. I think Dave's going to drop it in the chat. We'll also be sending out a recording of this entire program today, along with these tools, including the CAPE plan, so you can see the full plan, but also the RFP. All of these things will be coming to you via email shortly, so don't worry about taking screenshots and stuff necessarily. But it's a very simple 4-page document. It'll look a lot like the old school district simplified grants back in the day, because we worked with some of our past district governors and said, what does it take? How do we put this together? Make it simple so that districts and governors will participate in this. So we made it really easy to be able to fill it out. It's a big narrative. If you don't want to fill out ours specifically, you can fill out the main pieces of it and then attach your own work plan to it. It does need to be signed off by your district governor, even if it's a club level project. It still needs to be signed off by the district governor, so they know, because that district governor is who's going to ultimately be who's going to end up providing, or they're going to push somebody to do it, I'm sure, delegates are to provide to us all of the emails and names for their district members to be able to get that membership username and password to access the website. So they do need to sign off on that, so they're aware that that's part of the commitment to participating in the project. But again, it's only 4 pages long. We made it as easy as possible to be able to participate in it. And whether or not you receive the $1,000 matching grant, we hope that you'll still participate in the overall project, because it's such a great opportunity to be able to help test this and get projects out in your community. So what's the timeline? We are doing today's informational sessions for you, and then we're going to ask you to go back and ask your district governors, or ask other people in your district and neighboring districts to participate and jump on a similar call, which will be on December 8th. And at that point, the toolbox and everything will be live on our website because it's still under construction because it's a pretty big project. But we're going to ask that you get all those folks on again on December 8th. And then the proposals are due on February 28th. So you have a couple of months still. Really, you have 4 months from today to be able to get a project together and to put together an outline for it. But after that call, you'll still have about 2.5 full months to be able to pull it together. We will announce that the accepted projects, Dave will, by April 4th, and we'll start pairing the district governor or their designee with an ambassador or coordinator for that mentoring project by the end of that week. The treasurer will cut checks by April 15th. So we'll be coordinating back and forth with those funded districts in the meantime to get their account information so we can get the money to them. And then we'll be looking for those addresses and everything to get everybody signed up for that 1-year trial membership in Ragus. That'll be by the end of April, so they have time to jump in and really start using that immediately thereafter. In the meantime, we're going to have it open so that anybody can get in and look at that toolbox and the playbook and all of those tools publicly until we close that proposal window at the end of February. So everybody will be able to get in starting December 1st. They'll be able to hop in, look at it, start playing with it. Can I commit to doing a project? Is there enough there for me to do that? If there's not enough there for you to do it, let us know, because again, we're beta testing, so we need to know if it's not enough. We think it is. We think it's going to be there, but we need you guys to tell us if it's not. And then from there, we're going to look for interim reports in October, 12-month reports next March 31st. And that might be a final report, or it might be an interim report if it's a project that's going to take a year, or if it takes over a year. And some projects do. When you're doing a prevention education project, it might take a while to get into the schools. It might take a while to get it adopted and funded and all of those things that happen. So we'll just be looking for that interim report. So we'll be able to track that and know what's going on. We're going to tabulate all of our data after that. And be able to start presenting in June of 2023. So we want to be able to do something with this data as well. And that includes, part of that's going to be tweaking, right? And we're hoping to be able to receive more funding that we would be able to do more projects in the future and do more grants in the future. So that's a lot of information. And I said something about a toolbox. So let me tell you a little bit about the toolbox that's going to be in there and what'll be in the final CAPE plan when you get it from Dave. It has the toolbox out there that's really focused on prevention, education, and community awareness programs. It does not get into survivors. It does not get into prosecution. It does not get into any of those things. It is just on that front end of community awareness, prevention, education is that part of it. There will also be a lot of resources for major industries out there, as well as community awareness resources. The Rotary International and district resolutions will be out there. We've done a ton of website enhancements. If you go out and check out our website, I'll put it up there in a second, but we've done a ton of work there and it continues to evolve. There will also be the playbook for community awareness campaigns by Rotary Club, which gives a roadmap of what we've done to be able to do just a simple community awareness campaign in our own community and to be able to get that word out. If you're starting out at ground zero, or if another Rotarian in another club who's like, I think I kind of want to do something, but how on earth do I get it going? So we're going to be able to give those tools in there as well to give that roadmap, and they can pick and choose what direction they want to go with it, but it gives them something there. We hope that all of this, though, will help you as a Rotary leader better engage with your district and your clubs and community awareness, prevention, education projects. We hope that will give you the tools that you need, when we talked about it in the beginning, to be able to help you connect with other Ragus members, to be able to help you be engaged and empowered and equipped to be able to do projects. On the website, I know that Cynthia's put it in the chat a few times. You can grab this, or you can go out in the chat and grab it. The website is still up. The actual toolbox is, and my little guy here, is under construction. which means that it's not quite live yet. It will be live by December 1st. We continue to add to it and tweak it. When it goes out there December 1st, it will be live and ready to go. So if you come back to the December 8th program, you'll see it live and you'll see what it looks like. That's in there. That includes that educational program criteria. If you're looking at that, the vetted partners, the roadmap to pave the way, all of those things will be in that toolbox. You think of like all the little tools in there, those are the things that'll be there for you. And that'll continue to evolve over time. So make sure you go back to it regularly to get in. And again, it'll be open to the world until March 1st, and then we're going to lock it down so it's Ragus members only, or people that have that membership that comes with having accepted a proposal, whether it's funded or not. So if you're not a member, you should join, right? We do a lot. Our organization is amazing. We have connections all over the world. You saw that we were able to get a US ambassador to be able to speak with us today. We have connections all over that can help you have a project that's successful in your community, and we're here to be able to do that. So we encourage you to join us. And my last piece of it, I said at the beginning that not every superhero has a mask. I have one, and I have a cape. If I can get it out and get it right side up. And I encourage each of you to become superheroes and wear your cape and to be a modern day superhero to end slavery. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my formal presentation and open up for questions. I believe that there's some that have been coming into the chat. So if you want to go ahead and start asking away.
Yeah, great job, Amelia. Thanks for all you did. And just to that point, we're going to have some fun at the International Convention. So hopefully you all can be there in Houston. We'll have plenty of capes for purchase and have a big presence. We've already got, I know we've got teams from all over the world that are going to be at the convention. So we look forward to that. But great job on the work on this program. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. And just real quick, I'll mention too that, like Amelia said, we look at great programs to try to follow and collaborate with. And one of those is Bob Deering and Ashley in California, who had actually got the largest grant ever issued on human trafficking for a Rotary, a $215,000 grant. And so they were part of the team that helped develop this as well. And Amelia did a great job of herding all the cats. So thank you for that. Just one other quick comment is that there's a lot of chat about COVID and how it could get in the school systems. It depends on the country, obviously. So for those that ask the question, if you just put in the chat, like there's someone from the UK, just put in the chat and answer that question. And one great example is Cynthia, our coordinator and board member in Quito, Ecuador, started a Ragas Interact Club in the midst of COVID, all meeting online. And so that's pretty exciting. So COVID doesn't stop Rotary. We keep working to protect kids. So any other questions you see in there, Amelia?
I don't think I see actual questions that are in there, but if you have questions, my contact information is behind me. Feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to answer any questions as you go, because sometimes they get really personalized and customized based on your locality and what your thoughts are. So happy to be able to provide that for you guys. And again, your homework is to get your district governor and your local clubs to be able to come to the next session, which will be on December 8th via Zoom, similar type situation. Dave is sending out an invite to all the district governors, but it's going to take each of you to poke them to make sure that they pay attention to it and be able to get on, either they or a designee, because we really want to encourage them to be able to get engaged as well. So thank you very, very much for your time today. And you guys just do incredible work. So thank you.
It was amazing. And like was mentioned earlier, this is being recorded and I'll send it out. And also I've recorded the chat, but just so we don't miss anybody, if you would email me, I'll put my email in the chat several times. It's david@htnow.com, pretty easy to remember. Send me if you would like more information about this, just to make sure we don't miss anybody, or email Amelia, either way. But great job in the presentation. And like I said, we're going to have a lot of fun in Houston. It's a serious topic, but we know that we need to engage all Rotarians on this topic. And I just can't thank the membership enough for being here today and what you do, because you're the core to our success. So thank you for that. I want to thank the board members that were joining us today and the work they're doing day in, day out. Many of them were mentioned already, but I just want to thank them. But we have participation from 6 continents today. And so that's pretty exciting. And many of you I've talked to, and you're planning on being in Houston, and we'll definitely plan for that. The last thing I'll mention is in January, we're going to do a series of last January, we did a 7-hour Zoom, which is was fantastic, but it's pretty intense. So we plan on doing a series of 5 meetings over the month of January for Anti-Slavery Month. And we're going to do one in Spanish. Thanks to Cynthia and Mary Hulu is on the call. We're going to do one in Spanish there. We've got a great presence in Latin America and Mexico. So definitely going to do that. But I appreciate, again, your time this morning. It's a great program. Great job, Amelia. Great job, John. And thank you for presenting. And we're really excited about the future. And what we always tell people, as you all know, this is a very hard subject, but we offer hope. Rotary offers hope every day. And that's what we continue to do. But I really appreciate your time this morning. Again, feel free to reach out, and look forward to, I'm actually going to be at the Zone Institute with Bob Deering and tomorrow. Actually, I leave tomorrow. So we did, just lastly, I'll say we had a really great presence in Houston for the Zone Institute. Had 2 major panels on stage, and there was over 1,000 people for Rotary there. So we've really gained a lot of momentum over the last few years, and I appreciate all the work of the many that had worked previously, to include Mark Little, who founded the Action Group. Thank you for his work. And we continue to grow and continue to strive even during the COVID. So it's a big part because of you. Thank you so much. And I think lastly, I thank Cynthia for always helping out with everything, but co-hosting the meeting today and doing all the administrative stuff behind the scenes. Thank you for that. You all have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll send out an email for the next December meeting, as well as a link to the recording as well. Thanks for everybody, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, Dave. I did put, if everybody that's still on, I did put the Cape plan in the chat if you want to grab it.
Got it. Thank you.
Cool.
Great. Thank you. See you, everybody.